All right, why don't we get started? Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on this conversation about data products. I'm joined today by Adam Wilson from Alteryx. I'm Anthony Deighton. I run the data products business here at Tamr. Adam, longtime friend, maybe take a second, introduce yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Anthony, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So, always love riffing with you a little bit on what's going on in and around data, and then specifically data products. So, as Anthony mentioned, my name's Adam Wilson. I'm the GM for the Alteryx Analytics Cloud, and formerly the CEO of Trifacta. And so, spent my entire career in data integration, data transformation, and data cleansing. And it's a fun time to be doing data things right now.
Yes, couldn't agree more. And I think this topic of data products is a particularly timely one. This is clearly a new sort of idea, burgeoning space. And I think it really brings together the best of what Alteryx offers in terms of how we optimize data consumption and outcomes of decision making, which I think you're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about, and thinking about how we get clean, curated, continuously updated sources of data. Over the course of this conversation and presentation, if you have questions, and I hope you do, please use the chat panel that's located in the Zoom toolbar to go ahead and ask those questions. One of the benefits of that chat panel, of course, is you'll see everybody else's questions as well. And then at the end of the sort of presentation portion, we'll pick up those questions and do our best to answer as many of them as possible. So with that out of the way, and then of course, if there's anything else that comes up, you feel free to use the chat panel. You will be able to see it there. So with that out of the way, Adam, it would be great if you could start us off and really
Sure.
talk about what's going on in terms of data consumption, decision making, and outcomes, how people can really take advantage of better data.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Anthony. So I thought I'd maybe just set the stage a little bit, for this discussion, and I won't come in and rattle off lots of statistics about why data transformation, digital transformation, data modernization, why these things are important. I think if you're on this webinar, you probably understand that intuitively, or have been bombarded with that, over the course of the last several years, especially at this moment in time when everyone is in a more with less moment and trying to figure out how to use technology to get there. But I think, for me, what's kind of the interesting thing is that while there's a lot of heat and a lot of excitement, around this topic, generally people feel like things are going too slow. And even the analytics teams feel like they're really tied up with a lot of low level data janitorial work, and ultimately are frustrated by that. And so we have a situation where I think the desire to mature analytically, the desire to transform digitally is probably greater than it's ever been. And so, that for those of us who've been in the space a long time is great for what that means for the impact that we can have in our careers, but ultimately, is also proving to be challenging in reality in terms of how people are achieving that. And so, I think what we've seen is that, historically, for most companies, they have a small number of highly analytic individuals. Maybe they're data scientists or data engineers, advanced developers that are doing a lot of this work. And then there's everyone else. There's accountants, there's tax professionals, there's marketing analysts, there's engineers that are, that have questions, every day. What's my attrition rate? How are sales moving this week? Is our inventory optimized? And clearly there's not enough data scientists to handle all these requests. And so, what we find is that, ultimately, some then say, well, gee, okay, well, if that's the case, if there's not enough of these people, and by the way, the data scientists we have are also preoccupied with other projects, a lot of people will say, well, gee, maybe we can fix this by simply providing the knowledge workers with the training to become data scientists. And, we'll teach them all Python, or, we'll have them use the same tools and technologies that the data scientists use. And that's how we're going to get there. And, our customers have really told us that this is problematic on two fronts. One is that if you're in the line of business and you're an accountant, as an example, you may not want to be a data scientist. That's, not necessarily your, chosen area of expertise. You want to just be able to get to the data that you need to make the decisions to support, your specific role within the company. And a lot of times the other problem is that the tools that are, that data scientists use really aren't suited often for knowledge workers, which results in kind of low saturation rate and little to no adoption, and leads to, quite a bit of frustration. And so, I think what we then see is that in the end, companies have a choice to make about how much effort, resource, and dollars are they going to invest in democratizing analytics, versus the tools and projects that the central data science team will take on. And there's a trade-off there, but there's also a way to think about sort of balancing, some of this, so that while data scientists will likely take on the most complex and important, challenges and hopefully save or create very large piles of money related to those, big bet, projects, there will likely only be a few of those big bet projects, as your company won't have thousands of data scientists, but the nature of big bets, they'll probably have a very limited number of those. Meanwhile, the analysts across the company, can work on smaller projects that are likely saving or creating smaller amounts of money. But there are thousands of them in many cases. And the value that is created, eventually could be even larger than the big piles that are created on the left here. And so as you continue to upskill folks, on the right, the piles will continue to grow. So this plays out in kind of big and small ways each and every day across a really large set of people within the organization. And the reality is that, by upskilling the domain experts, better questions and better projects will come in and enable the data science team to save more money as well. The functional domain experts that know where the gold is buried and how and really understand how the business works and what are the key questions, will make it easier for everyone to collaborate and to implement solutions. And so, as the teachers, the data scientists will become trusted advisors and will have a seat at the table as the domain experts are working on their efforts, even as it democratizes across the team. And so, what we see is that, best in class companies that are accelerating progress and analytics maturity are investing purposefully in both sides. If you invest 90% of your resources on the right hand and or 90% on the left, you simply won't get the benefits as a company that is more balanced. And whether it's 50-50 or 60-40, depends on the company and where you are in your analytic journey. But balance is certainly key. And what we see is that you need to really think about balancing these investments, and maybe over investing in the left or right side of this model will generally result in a lower level of benefit than expected. And so while there's no set answer, the distribution really depends on the company's situation, investments that have already been made, and where they are. But we really think that this is a moment in time to again really think in a very deliberate way about where some of these investments are going and where you will ultimately see ROI. And this is in our experience has really played out to great benefit for organizations that have embraced this idea, and that we're not just saying like let's let the people who know the data best do the work, but we're also complementing that by saying how do we make sure that those who have deep expertise in data are able to collaborate with those individuals and support them in a more meaningful way. And so the example that I'm highlighting here is that was really about the success of this balanced approach, where in 18 months you see massive transformative results that were achieved across a consulting company with over 100,000 users, and both top line and bottom line impact through, getting more people involved in this, where they can create their own data products and they can start to do more of this work on their own. So this doesn't become just the exclusive purview of the highly technical. And these are the types of impacts that we're seeing now starting to play out across most organizations that are really looking at this very strategically. So a lot of times then the next question is like, okay, well, fine, but like, so how do we get started? And while we want to see a large percentage of knowledge workers and process impacted, the path to get there has to take into account the actual process or journey of each of the individuals involved. Our experience in helping democratize analytics has really shown that the journey for a knowledge worker is very consistent and follows these steps. First, people learn by or start learning by how to wrangle the data in more advanced ways that are more efficient than just doing things inside of spreadsheets, which is probably what they were doing before. Often the data starts to get larger and more complicated. Then they start thinking about automation. So how do I automate analytics and start to help the machines do more of the work? And as we sort of have this new approaches to things around AI and ML and generative, the idea of automation comes into focus more and more for most organizations. And it's important to note that when they automate an analytic process, they're typically aren't changing the process. They're simply automating what's there today. And that's great. And it's but it's not necessarily a transformation yet. It's more wringing a lot of manual effort and cost out of things, sort of eliminating manual tasks and allowing people to move on to sort of higher order work. And then, as you learn some analytics, likely not, full modeling, but, simple, rules like, if then, kinds of rules and other conditional logic, then, you start to apply some of those capabilities. And then eventually you get to a point where you can start to really think about re-engineering the process as much as just, automating it and analyzing it. And, this for us, is really where you start to see sort of increasing returns to scale as you go down this journey. I think that many times the idea that you want to go down this journey, then sort of causes everyone to step back and say, well, okay, I'm not the first one to do it. There must be best practices around this, and certainly there are. Having done this for decades, but we've done quite a bit of research and work to curate and refine core best practices for effectively driving analytic upskilling within an organization. And you'll likely have some of these in place yourselves today. That wouldn't be a surprise. But to be truly successful, at something, you really need strong leadership and a clear plan that builds on many of these approaches and combines many of these tactics. If really, if this is something that's of interest, most organizations that we work with typically have an analytics, innovation program where they're very intentional about combining many of these tactics to really to deliver the upskilling across the organization. And this is something we've obviously spent a lot of time working with customers on, and in some cases have collaborated with Tamr on as well. So if that's of interest to you, certainly happy to tell you more. But with that, hopefully that gives everyone a little bit of a sort of a backdrop in terms of some context. This is sort of why data products, why now, why democratization matters, in this overall exercise. And with that, I'd love to hand it back to Anthony to talk a little bit about the data product specific piece of this and where you go from here.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Adam. I think that's a very compelling story around how we see consumption endpoints shifting and changing, and frankly, just the maturity of those. And I'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk a little bit of, as you said, Adam, let's talk a little bit about data products more generally and how we see that strategy coming into and connecting with what you started us with. So the first thing to recognize is the data space itself has changed a lot over the last 10 years. And in particular, the challenge used to be big data. It used to be storing and managing large quantities of data. That itself was sort of a fundamental problem that organizations struggled with. And that's largely a solved problem at this point. Between inexpensive cloud storage, and cloud data warehouses, the idea of storing and managing large quantities of data, largely a solved problem. The idea that we're going to put all of that in one place is not ever happening. Like, that's a dream we should let go of, because data tends to be organized in the way that the organization that created it is organized. So if you've organized your business by product line, then you tend to organize your data by product line. If you organize your business by geography, you tend to have geographic silos of data. As Adam indicated, the consumption endpoints have never been better. So it is a wonderful time to be a data scientist and an analyst, a consumer of data. These tools that exist are just phenomenal, really are in a position to be able to do really sophisticated analysis, really simple. And in particular, and I saw a couple of questions asking about this, but in particular around AI and ML. So the ability for anyone on this call or anyone on this call's team members to be able to go in, take data, and build a predictive model around it, like that is truly easy today, and much easier today than it's ever been. And very much to your point, Adam, it's never been more important. Enabling and empowering everyone in the organization with these data consumption endpoints is the mechanism to achieving great ROI. So we have this sort of interesting duality. Storing and managing data has never been cheaper and easier, and it's never been easier to get value and ROI out of that data. But then how come everyone on this call would largely agree that when we do this analysis, the question that remains is about the data itself? People look at the results in these analyses and they say, wait a second, how come there's 3 instances of Microsoft? I know there's only one Microsoft in the world. Like, why is there 3 in the data? Or they'll look at it, they'll say, how come that data is missing an address? Like, why do we not know the address of that customer? Like, that can't be right. Or they'll look at the data and they'll say, this is really compelling, but did you include the data from Europe in this? You didn't include the data from Europe. Okay, well, now we have to go back to the drawing board and sort of understand how to do that. And not for lack of data management tools. I think the great travesty in the space today is that there is just an enormous amount of software available to organizations that are interested in sort of becoming, knitting together these set of tools to try to solve this problem. It's really a smorgasbord, buffet of the tools available to everyone to try to solve this problem. And I liken this very much to the situation that existed in the 1990s for application software. So if in the 90s, and anyone on the call was around then, if you had the problem of creating a system for people to manage accounts, opportunities, and contacts, your solution to that problem was to procure an Oracle database and a 5GL programming language and a whole set of software, and then you'd build a system for doing that. And along came Siebel and Salesforce and PeopleSoft and a whole set of application software companies and said, this is silly. We know a system to manage, in my example, accounts, contacts, and opportunities. We're just going to build that and deliver it to you as a CRM application. And so part of the idea behind a data product strategy is to employ a similar set of logic, but to the data management space. And the simple idea is, what if we could have an application approach to data? If we could build clean, curated, continuously updated versions of the key entities that matter in our organization, we could deliver these as products, and not as a set of tools that somebody has to knit together. And so we would deliver data around customers and suppliers and companies and products and parts and locations and employees, and every entity that mattered in your enterprise would be delivered as a packaged product that gave you the best, cleanest, most curated, most up-to-date version of those key data that mattered to you as an organization. And what that might do is allow you to introduce a new set of capabilities on top of that data product. So instead of thinking about working on knitting together a set of tools, by packaging this data, delivering it in this form, it allows you to open up new capabilities to your enterprise. So allowing people, for example, to comment on data or to provide feedback on that data and say, this data is wrong or this data is really helpful, or find who the experts in your organization are in a specific domain of data, or think about how you could bring data together across silos, or improve the quality of it, or loop in or integrate third-party sources into these data products. So by focusing energy around these key entities and delivering those key entities that's in a packaged way, it sort of opens this possibility of new capabilities. And it's important to think about this not as a set of tooling. So this isn't yet another set of tools in the data management space, God forbid, but really to be thinking about this around these domain-driven, industry-specific, entity-specific domains. So, thinking about it from the perspective of B2B customers or B2C customers, contacts, suppliers, patients, providers if you're in the healthcare space, to thinking about it not as from the perspective of the source, but thinking about it from the perspective of these consumption endpoints around a specific verticalized domain. And in doing that, you could think about delivering this, and I like this to think about this as an app store for data. So there's the vision here is that if you employ a data products approach, that you should be in a position to deliver to your organization, again, the key entities that matter. They should really think about all of the data associated with that key entity, and they should be dynamic and updated continuously behind the scenes, without human sort of intervention, and really focus on the consumption endpoints. So thinking about how we deliver this data, to fantastic tools, like Alteryx. When you think about these key entities that matter in your organization, it enables a set of use cases from a user perspective. So they are naturally consumption oriented. It gives people a mechanism for jumping off into these analytic experiences. And it also gives the organization a view into how that data is changing. So when new sources are added, new records get added, new attributes show up. In doing that, when you look at the details of any particular entity, it should give you a view on all of the data in that entity that you have been able to sort of bring together and deliver to decision makers, and give people visibility into how that data is changing over time. And you should be able to go into a specific instance of, in the example on the screenshot, a customer, but it could be a supplier, it could be an employee, it could be anything, contact, and give you a kind of 360 view of that entity. Should be beautiful, visually engaging, and let you see all of the data that we have as an organization around that key entity, and provide feedback and updates to that data. So if you see an error, this should be the mechanism by which you alert somebody that there's a problem in the data. So this is a very different approach to thinking about how we deliver data into these consumption endpoints than we've had historically. Historically, sort of the traditional approach, often thought about as MDM, or sort of this top-down master data approach, typically built on the back of hundreds of rules that try to impose order on sources of data. Our view is that this is a sort of fundamentally flawed approach. There will never be a scenario in which you can build enough rules and enough human curation to create clean, curated, updated views of these key entities that matter. Maybe if you invest huge amounts of time, energy, and money, you might be able to do it for a single entity, a simple entity, like, for example, the companies that you do business with, and in one particular domain, maybe. Our view is that the technology innovation that's broken this market open and allowed for a new disruptive approach is AI. So the ability to train a machine to look at data and do what humans are so capable of doing, you can clean that data, bring it together, allows you to take a new approach, this data product approach, where we can focus on key domains rather than focusing on sources. Then we can do things quickly, significantly less expensively, and you can empower domain experts in the organization to focus their energy where the machine learning is having trouble. Again, built on the back of an AI-driven machine learning approach to solving this problem. And what this enables is new roles in your organization. So being able to think about empowering data product managers, like you might have product managers if you're a software company, but you have data product managers whose job and role is to look at these key entities and manage the experience that decision makers have with that data and empower them to improve that data over time. Very much like you would expect a product manager to engage with customers, hear feedback, and improve a product. Data product managers work with decision makers to understand where the gaps are in their data, where they're missing sources, missing attributes, where the data quality isn't good, and give them a set of tooling to be able to iterate to improve that and work in an agile manner. So, that's very much what Tamr's focused on, is how to build a framework for doing that and delivering these data products to organizations. And again, from Adam and my perspective, our view here is that if you bring together world-class consumption endpoint like Alteryx, which really allow you to get better outcomes out of your decision-making, and you can connect that back to the best data you have in your organization, that really what you can produce is better outcomes. I don't want to talk over you here, Adam, but I'm sure you have a point of view on how these two approaches work together.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that, part of the aha here is that, I think people have woken up to the fact that, if they're, data products, if they've got data quality product challenges with their data products, then their machine learning, their AI, their analytics may be worthless. And it's creating a bit of a burning platform to really think about, these approaches to building data products, with, and really kind of continuously curating them as you elaborated. And then at the same time, marrying that to this idea that, we'd love to, unleash this on a much larger set of individuals who are increasingly being told, hey, be more data driven. And they're like, great. Well, then if you can kind of give me the data in a form that I can use it, I'm happy to be, but don't tell me to be more data driven. And then tell me I have to wait, 6 months for a table to be added to a data warehouse so I can answer a question. And I think it's really about, increasing the velocity with which people can build out, take these canonical forms and build out data products, based on them, and then ultimately take action, on the insights that that they can come up with. So
with that, I know there have been quite a few questions showing up in the chat panel, and please don't stop. Feel free to toss some more in there. Behind the scenes, Katie has been feverishly reading these questions and trying to bring them together. And at the risk of putting you on the spot, Katie, any questions that you want to toss?
Yeah, let's do it, Anthony. Okay, so first question we'll go through is, Anthony, do you find organizations have MVP definitions for each data product?
It's a great question. If you're going to take an agile approach to managing data, then this concept of an MVP, a minimum viable product, for those unfamiliar with the acronym, becomes really important. And I'd say the great risk and tendency for organizations is to hold data back instead of pushing it to users through these consumption endpoints, and try to make the data perfect before delivering it. A much better strategy is ship early and iterate quickly. And so being in a position to push data, even though you recognize it's not perfect, but push it out to users, let them, use a tool like Alteryx to start making decisions with that data and recognize the limitations in that data, and then have a mechanism of providing feedback so that your data product managers can iterate and improve that. So if, whatever timeline you have in your head, cut it in half, ship, get feedback. That's really the key.
Yeah, I think as much as you try to presuppose, all of the potential uses and challenges, until you get things into the wild, you often, only know a fraction, and like a sunshine clause, like the more you shine bright light on the data, and get people actually working with it, the faster you're going to get up that learning curve, and the faster you're going to mature those data products.
Right. Thank you both. Let's see. So we have another question from EP. In this approach, do data product managers work for internal customers who provide the market signals for the types of data products that they need?
My view, the short answer is yes. It's an internal customer of these data. And the challenge for a data product manager, which is very similar to the product challenge of a software product manager in a software company, is how do I get feedback? How do I know where this data is doing well and where it's falling short? And so the concept here is to provide a feedback loop so that, for example, you could be in Alteryx, you could see an error in the data, and you could simply sort of report that problem right there. And then that just becomes, in a way, like a ticket in your ticketing system to say, look, there's a problem here. I need someone, a data product manager, to resolve that. Now, that resolution may be in a source system. That resolution may be to improve the matching in the machine learning that delivered that data product. That resolution may be a process change in terms of how you actually collect that data. Like, how you resolve that becomes, like in software development, can be a variety of different channels. But the key there is to have this linkage between these consumption endpoints and feedback in the process of development.
Right. Great question. So the Katie has a question here, kind of going back to, how does Tamr define a data product?
Yeah, so very simply put, a data product is the clean, curated, continuously updated data organized around the key entities that matter to your organization. So these think about the key types of data that you use to make decisions: your customers, your suppliers, your employees, and depending on your industry, there could be hundreds of other entities. But it's the clean, curated, continuously updated versions of data organized in that manner. Adam, is that consistent with your definition, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think, your point about around the entities that matter to your business is also super important point, because we do see a lot of cases where organizations are trying to look really broadly at this, and they almost get sort of overwhelmed or sort of lost in the magnitude of the problem. And instead, you can, with a more focused approach, where you go in and say, these are the things that we want to continuously curate because they're so impactful to the business. And if we start there, then we can merchandise the existence of these data products, unleash it on the business, start to get some of those wins that we can then, kind of merchandise and inspire people as to what's possible. And then it sort of organically grows from there.
So at the risk of asking a question, since I'm one of the presenters, but Adam, you have this really nice framework for thinking about the sort of the path. In the context of that, what if you had to pick one entity that an organization should start with, and we didn't plan this ahead, so I don't know what you're going to say, but if you had to pick one entity that an organization should start with to organize as a data product, what would you pick?
Great question. I guess I don't know that I could give you an answer that's like it's this entity, because I think it is a little bit contextual in terms of like what is core to your business. But the other criteria that maybe would be instructive is I would pick something that is where the data is relatively accessible. We run into a lot of cases where people pick things where the data isn't very accessible. I'd pick something where the data is doesn't have a lot of security issues. We run into a lot of cases where people choose things that sometimes take quarters or years to pull together because of risk and compliance concerns around PII, PHI, PCI, all the different regulations. I would pick something that that ultimately has some reasonably broad applicability to the business. So while it's focused, it's not idiosyncratic. I think we talk a lot about again getting kind of quick wins and learning from those quick wins. And I think if the data is not accessible, if there's a lot of like governance and security requirements around it that don't allow you to sort of democratize it to a reasonable level and get more people involved in it, if it's something that is so idiosyncratic that it kind of only matters to a small part of your organization, then you don't end up getting sort of the full, not just the full learning, but also the acceleration and the validation that you want within the organization. And so I think, just sort of being a little bit careful about sort of picking and choosing those first few, I think becomes, there's a bit of an art and a science to that. And the ones I think who've done that well, then, there's a growing hunger within the organization, say, yes, more of that, please. Right.
Those are really useful metrics for everyone on this call to be thinking about as you sort of think about the key entities that matter in your business. Sorry, Katie, I screwed up your Q&A. So.
Oh, it's all good. We're jumping around. People are firing questions in the chat. It's great. Okay, so Katie has a follow-up question about defining data products. Is each entity a data product, and how is a data product accessed by users?
Actually, the answer in the chat panel there, but I'll read it for folks. So the simple answer to Katie's question is yes, each entity is a data product. So that part's easy. In terms of how data products are accessed, they should be accessed through world-class consumption endpoints like Alteryx, meaning the idea of the data product is not to create another consumption endpoint, but you want to deliver that data typically into a cloud data warehouse, but it could be into an S3 file share if it's relevant, and then you access that through the best consumption endpoints that your organization is invested in. This is not another way to create bar charts and line charts. Like, as I hopefully made abundantly clear, the mechanisms of doing analytics are well established and world class, and so we don't need another one of those.
All right, thank you. So we have a question from Matt. How would you differentiate a data product from a data service? Would this be the split as you described between data science output versus output driven from knowledge workers?
That is an interesting question. I'm not sure how I would define a data service, but maybe Adam, you have a view here, but I think maybe a more general answer to your question is the idea should be that everyone in your organization have access to these data products. Obviously, privacy and security issues notwithstanding, and your points made earlier, Adam, are really relevant here. So we want to apply those filters and rules here. But the general idea is that this should be available through a set of APIs for data scientists. It should be available as a table for, for more analytic use cases. Yeah, so we think of them as human interfaces and machine interfaces working together. Both are important. Yeah, but I don't know, Adam, do you have a view?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I'll maybe take it in a slightly different direction. I think one of the things that when you sort of think about data products powering data services, the idea is that we really, the more people that we can have that are exposed to this, who have the domain expertise or the context in their heads, the better. And what ends up happening is, a lot of the work that the central IT function was doing in order to, get the data into a reasonable place. A lot of that work, I was meeting with a bank recently that was saying, like, listen, we have in our algorithmic trading group, we have 236 quants split roughly equally between fixed income and equities, and we've got 10 people that are responsible for supporting them, and they have this voracious appetite for data because they're looking for things to trade on, and they're stitching data together in new and interesting ways all the time. And they said, the interesting thing was, at some point we realized we couldn't hire a way out of this problem because we didn't have the budget. And even if we had the budget, like, finding and retaining the talent is like super challenging. And so we just decided to open up raw zones, on our cloud data warehouse or a data lakehouse, and let a lot of the interactive experimentation, the immersive stuff go on. And then what was nice is that, now people weren't waiting in line, but they ultimately were self-serving, and they had the context. So they were probably better at figuring out how to stitch these things together and better at understanding what good was or what was interesting. But the minute they got to a point where they created a model then that they wanted to trade on, that's when the central function got back involved and said, hey, now we need to figure out how to operationalize this at scale, because this must be a governed thing. We're going to make multi-million-dollar trading decisions, and we have to show, like, what training data birthed what algorithm, and how is that data transformed and manipulated along the way? How is it cleansed? And then how did it ultimately drive the decisions that we made? And so, really powerful story of the balance. I know there were some questions in the threads about how do you think about governance and democratization. Like, I think it's a false trade-off. Like, I think a lot of people sort of feel like I can have one or the other, but I think that you're seeing really mature organizations recognize that they can do both and take a risk-adjusted approach to thinking about how much do I democratize and what types of data do I democratize, and yet still how do I govern. And the other interesting thing that came out of that example, which I think was a little bit surprising to them, is that they were able to crowdsource a lot of really interesting ideas that were coming from the quants and then make those available to the rest of the organization. So in some sense, like, their job kind of got up leveled to, let me go find interesting data to bring in that can help build new and interesting, data products and algorithms. And at the same time, when somebody gets to something that's really powerful, let me make sure that that's sort of shared across the organization, so everybody gets the benefit. And I think that as you start to see some of those scenarios play out, these become the force multiplying effects that really are going to separate the winners from the losers in the next decade, and really are shaping the frontier for competition when you think about the data.
Thank you, Adam, for bringing us back to the top of the call. So there are a couple questions that were submitted earlier from Brian and Ed. I'm going to combine two. Ed asks, where do you see generative analytics fit into the analytics mature timeline? And then Brian asks, do you see organizations that have a formal model lifecycle management and government processes, or is it mostly ad hoc? Two questions in one.
So
I'm happy to take a stab at the first one if you want.
Yeah.
So generative, I think, is it is a we're at this like amazingly interesting moment with generative, and I think we're very, very early innings, but you're already seeing, some of the impact play out. And I think what's been exciting for us is that, we've always been searching for higher degrees of abstraction that allow more and more people to do this work on their own, right? If you sort of boil it all down, sort of fundamentally, we want to help the people who know the data best do the work, and regardless of their level of technical acumen. And I think that with generative, now you're starting to see these with large language models, these natural language opportunities to create very sophisticated, very complex things, or to operate on data in sophisticated and complex ways through a very human experience. And I think that that becomes now another, there's code ways to do things, there's visual ways to do things. Now there's going to be natural language ways to do things. Those things will complement and reinforce each other. So I think in terms of the sort of the doing of the work, you're going to see, continued acceleration, and that will feed, I think, even broader democratization. I think the other thing about generative that we're really excited about is, if you think about work as like, hey, a third of my time I'm doing the work, a third of my time I'm packaging the work, and a third of my time I'm communicating the work. A lot of the innovation that's gone on over the last, couple of decades has been a lot about the doing of the work. But actually about 2/3 of the process is the packaging and the communicating. And it's equally as important. And so with generative now, you're starting to see scenarios, and we released a capability called Magic Documents recently, where we'll actually take insights. So it's sort of the idea that, why can't the data sets tell us what's most interesting about them, right? And then once we find those ahas, why can't the actual creation of the PowerPoint presentations, the PDFs, the Word documents, the things that are packaged and then disseminated in order to get to business decisions, like, why can't the system actually generate a lot of that for me? So that either I can just get on with making the decisions, or I have at least a draft to get started on, so I'm not having to sort of piece it all together myself, right? And so when we start to see that in the hands of customers, and they start to realize, like, oh my gosh, like there was like so much time sort of taking the ahas and then translating that into all of these places so that we could rally people around these decisions. And now all of a sudden, a whole bunch of that can be, created with a click of a button, is, the synthesis around that, becomes incredibly, incredibly exciting to tackle the productivity of that other 2/3. So.
The only thing I would add there is, one of the keys to these generative technologies is feeding in high quality data. The best way to make sure these models hallucinate is to feed them junky data. So the focus on high quality, clean, curated, continuously updated data into these models is like a really key feature.
Yeah, and increasingly refining those sort of generalized models with with your data, right? So the clean,
Exactly.
high quality, and proprietary your data, right? And I think that's where a lot of these.
Yeah, because you take a foundation model, presumably they've done a good job working with the data. But now you layer your data on top, and you want to make sure it's really good data.
Absolutely.
Okay. So there's a question on here. Adam, do you think most organizations have a reasonably mature level of data literacy? If not, how do you help with this?
Yeah, I would say no. And if the one of the things I posted in the chat was a link to this analytics maturity assessment. So the International Institute for Analytics has an actual maturity assessment that they have created, and they've collected thousands and thousands of assessments across the globe, and the average sort of level of maturity according to their scale. And again, I won't, in the interest of time, I won't try to educate everybody on exactly how they sort of think about each of the phases and steps on their scale, but is something like around between 2 and 3. So I would say most organizations have a long way to go you know, to get to a level of maturity that, you know, they're going to see, you know, kind of meaningful benefit to their business. But the good news is that, like, hey, there's you know, there's a lot of opportunity here. And for those of us in data and analytics, we get a chance to really drive and impact our organizations by helping them move up that curve. I would encourage you to all to check out that framework. It does a nice job of laying out, like, what are the phases of maturity? How do you self-assess at each phase? What are the things that are necessary to move from one phase to the next? And it's not about, you know, it's not a product about products, you know, as much as Anthony and I would love for everyone to be using Tamr and Alteryx. You know, it's really about thinking about, you know, people, process, and technology, and how it all comes together, and gives some shining examples of some folks that have moved up the curve and the impact that it's had on their business, especially as you're going through these kind of disruptions, you know, in the economy, and thinking back to the last time we experienced something like this, and you know, who are the organizations that kind of came out of this, you know, having digitally transformed in ways that that allowed them not just to recapture some of the growth that they saw prior to pandemics and you know, and economic corrections, but ultimately, you know, really slingshot, you know, them ahead of competition. So I'd encourage all of you to check that out.
That's great, Adam. Thank you. All right. So, Anthony, I know you addressed this in the chat, but could you talk a little bit more about the example that you shared? And I just lost where the question was.
Sure.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So, who was it? Scott, I think, asked for sort of contextualize it with a sort of more specific example. And I threw out this idea of a bank that wants to understand its counterparty risk, but has organized the counterparty data, as banks often do, by, for example, product line, although it could have just as well been by geography. And imagine that each financial product that they're offering, which each one has a counterparty, shows up in a different database. But they have no mechanism of understanding whether they may have a credit product and an equity product with the same company, but so it's the same counterparty, but across two different products. And then Scott had actually replied to me, which I thought was very telling, that I think he'd actually worked on a project just like this. Hopefully I'm not mixing up. Oh, sorry, E.B. Burke, E.P. Burke, sorry, had indicated he'd done something very much like this, and it had taken three plus years. And that's very consistent, because when you try, or consistent with our experience, because when you try to take on a project like that manually, what you're doing is asking people to go database by database and find where you have the same counterparty. And then typically what you will do is build rules that sort of say, well, you know, if the company name has this much in common, and if the, you know, like, and the person has to go in and validate that, yeah, these two are the same, you know, and it's a road to nowhere. It takes forever. It's extremely expensive. The idea here at its core is to train a machine to do that work on our behalf. And you want to use, people are very good at this. And I showed you two instances of, well, my example that I used earlier, Microsoft, and one was Microsoft, the other was Microsoft, Inc., and the other one was Microsoft Corporation. The other one was LinkedIn. Like, you'd be like, oh, okay, these are all the same, right? Computers are terrible at this. You know, the idea that you could train a machine to do that by watching the patterns of what humans do. You know, if ChatGPT and these large language models have taught us anything, it's that computers can be really good at tasks that we thought previously were only human capable. If you then take that and use it to bring that data together, you can enrich it with third-party sources, which is just really a match problem at its core. You can look at the quality of that data and really improve it by looking, you know, doing a bunch of pattern matching, and then deliver it to these consumption endpoints. If you can do that in, you know, days or weeks instead of months and years, if you can do that at a reasonable cost, not millions and millions of dollars, we think there's a significant opportunity there.
That's great, Anthony. Thank you. So there were questions for both Adam and Anthony about partnerships, GSI, services organizations and partnerships with GSI and smaller players. It was to both of you at different points in the webinar. So I'd like to take the last few minutes to hear from both of you about how companies are working with both Tamr and Alteryx, and what's available out there. I know you answered it in the chat, but
do you want to talk about I know you guys have really rich partnerships, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, a tremendous amount of the work that goes on, as part of this is through partnerships, and in particular through specialist and boutique data-focused integrators and technology consulting companies that come in and really sort of look at ways to help organizations, get on this path. For us, it is a super meaningful, part of our go-to-market strategy. We understand that a lot of the boutique SIs, in addition to the global integrators, have built a lot of methodology around this. We openly and freely share all of our methodology so that they can make use of it as part of the implementations that they're doing, as well as all of the best practices. And a huge piece of our digital kind of transformation program relies on getting that expertise involved in a lot of these projects. I think it's usually an essential piece to getting this done, given that everyone's often needs an outside perspective, is trying to figure out how to change culture as much as change process and technology. And so we collaborate extensively with global and boutique or regional integrators.
Yeah, I would say Tamr's earlier in our journey here, but there are a lot of really interesting consulting firms that are, and I think there's a big opportunity to be thinking about guiding and helping organizations think about building a data product strategy. Very much to your point, Adam. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So let's see, out of the link you just shared, it just went to me. So if you don't mind resending that to everybody.
Oh, sorry.
I know,
Yeah,
Zoom
sure.
chat is confusing.
Yeah, sorry about that.
At least you sent a chat that was meant for everybody instead of to me, and you sent it to everybody. I've had that happen. It's always exciting. All right. Well, I think we don't have any more time for questions, so go ahead and sign off.
Yeah, so thanks everyone so much for joining. This was a fun conversation, and I hope everyone got something out of it. Adam, thank you so much for making time and joining, and for the brilliant insights. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thanks again for allowing me to join. It's always a pleasure, and really value the partnership with Tamr. So this is hopefully the sign of many good things to come.
Excellent. Thank you.